bring you another edition of the Live from the Heartland show, sometimes known as Heartland at Home during these times of the pandemic. This is number 70 for the week of September 25th, and we have three really neat guests. Two are really close friends, and one, I think, Katie, you may know. The first guest will be our state representative, Kelly Cassidy, filling us in on the recent legislative session down in Springfield. And then Michael Deutsch of the People's Law Office will talk to us about Attica, the prison rebellion from 50 years ago. And then we'll welcome an appearance in event news from Donnie Biggins of Fitzgerald's with a lot of good music coming in there.
Michael, is that you?
Yes, Katie.
Okay. Are we?
Turning off that phone. I thought I had it covered. Sorry.
We're just gonna put this out there. Hurricane Ida survivors are still struggling. They could use your help. Any amount would help. It's money they need, not stuff. Google, how do I help Hurricane Ida survivors? And a slew of things pop up, including warnings about disaster fraudsters, so you don't give to the wrong site. Please help them. They need it badly, and they're being left alone when they need help. Okay.
Katie, share with us a little bit about Biden continues to work for us.
I just wanted to say he continues to work for us every day, apparently. Think about that. It's a new experience, okay? And I know he's being battered by a lot of things, but he's handling it, and I appreciate that somebody is on the ball in DC. It's also time to call the leadership in DC because of what's going on. The people who might push a shutdown are called Republicans, and we need to keep that from happening. We'll talk more about that with our state rep when she gets on, because we need to get some intelligence on what the debt ceiling is anyway. What's its purpose?
Okay, about redistricting here in Chicago, the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission asks for your feedback on their draft map. Find them at chicagowards.org. It's the last chance you will have to chime in, either virtually or in writing. And that is October 1st. So do it. Check it out.
Easy for you to say. In COVID, Illinois is still only 54% backs. Come on. The FOP leader, as ever, stands in opposition to anything reasonable. And that would be the Chicago mandate that Mayor Lightfoot is trying to put out, that all Chicago employees get vaccinated by October 15th. It's interesting that the police are, or their representative is wailing against this. And the two least vaccinated places, I just realized, are the police wards, as they say. I just caught that this week, and that blows my mind. So when you're dealing with police, make sure you wear a mask.
Okay.
So you are listening to Live from the Heartland, WLUW 88.7 FM. Kelly Cassidy. Michael, you were supposed to introduce.
I know, I was going to say our local hero from the 14th district of the great state of Illinois, the one, the only Kelly Cassidy. Good morning to you, Kelly.
Good morning.
And the newly signed energy bill, how great is it?
It's one that I struggled with. I'm not going to lie. I've never voted. I didn't vote for the previous version of it. And then when the ComEd indictments came down, I felt pretty good about that decision. And so I watched this one really carefully, because I was still concerned about, sort of that fundamental issue of bailing out profitable corporations. I will say throughout the process, we began with, locking ComEd out of the room, which, gave me some confidence, woman of a certain age, that gave me some confidence to pay, watch it a little more closely. Towards the end, we had some coal companies making demands, and that was troubling. And the truth is, whenever you get a bill this big, there's always going to be plenty to like and plenty to hate. And for me, I broke from my record of never having voted for a corporate subsidy and voted for it this time. And I did so because, honestly, the world's on fire, and the emergency, the climate emergency outweighed my concerns over the ComEd money in it, the rate hike money in it. The rate hike is very specifically focused on bringing equity to the renewables sector. And so, that's helpful. And the ethics provisions that were laid on top of it for specific to the ComEd indictment gave me some confidence as well. They're not going to be able to pass any of the costs of the deferred prosecution agreement onto ratepayers. Things like that never would have happened under Madigan, never would have happened in the days when they literally were driving the negotiations. So I was pleased to see some very real change come about.
It includes for the environmental justice communities who
Absolutely.
Which they've been waiting a long time for that, right?
100%. And again, that wouldn't have gotten onto the agenda under under the processes that bills like this came about in the past under Madigan. We've been raising environmental justice issues for ever. And they never were well received before. And so, there is a lot to be very pleased about in this bill.
So, go ahead, Michael. You want to do that?
Let's talk a little bit about Texas, Kelly. You've been on social media, whether it was serious or not. You've put forward the Texas Act, calling for bounties to be made for turning people in for, I guess, having kids or having abortions. And then there's some serious stuff going on with the Parental Notification Act. Fill us in on all this, because all I really got to read was something from the Illinois Family website, which really doesn't like you very much.
Yeah, they're big fans of mine. They're big fans of mine. I kind of feel like I need to send that writer a new thesaurus, because she's running out of ridiculous names to call me. So we might have to take up a collection to get her a new word of the day calendar or something. But the Texas Act, which is the Expanding Abortion Services Act, is very much there is an element of hold my beer to the introduction, no question. It creates the same right of civil action that they use in Texas to try to get around the constitutional concerns that Roe lays out. But instead of putting a bounty on folks who help folks access reproductive health, it instead creates this right of action against anyone who commits an act of sexual assault or domestic violence, and anyone who is the cause of an unintended pregnancy. Another difference between this and what Texas's law is that half of the awards in those cases would be set aside in a special fund to pay the costs of folks fleeing their home states to access care. The truth is, this is a terrible, terrible way to make laws. My favorite part about it is that the lobbyist for the Family Institute, in his response to the introduction, declared my law blatantly unconstitutional. And I thank him for that, because that's exactly what I wanted him to say, because that means that the law in Texas is also blatantly unconstitutional. We as legislators have a responsibility to take a look at new ways that folks are making laws and examine what they're going to do in our state. And that's why I introduced the Texas Act. We need to have that conversation about putting bounties on our citizens' heads. We need to have that conversation about what happens when other states cut off access to healthcare and those patients come to us. How are we going to support those patients? So this bill is about that conversation. This bill is not about truly embracing the approach Texas has taken.
You one clever girl, Missy. You left out the repealing the parental notification. Yeah. How's that going?
So that's the very serious business that's before us. When we passed the Reproductive Health Act, I declared that we had built a firewall around the state of Illinois, and we did. but it has a really big hole in it, the size of everyone under 18.
That's right.
And so we have to repeal the Parental Notice Act. This is one that's super personal to me. That bill was passed when I worked for the National Organization for Women. It was a big loss for us. I can still see myself in my office crying over the loss. So repealing this is personal and will be incredibly gratifying. We're very close. We're going to get there. Last night on the Sun-Times broadcast with Lynn Sweet and Laura Washington, Senate President Don Harmon said that he's going to put it on the board. So that's what we've been waiting for. We've been, waiting for the Senate to act. Strategically, that's where we decided to start. And so, once that comes over in veto session, we'll be able to pass it in the House. Anna Moeller, the lead sponsor in the House, is a badass to end all badasses. She's got this. And she's got a lot of us behind her helping with that roll call. It's well past time to repeal this act.
Michael, ask about the reefer report there, City Council.
Oh yeah, we saved our reefer report, which we do on selected days for certain people. Now, you were instrumental in bringing some really good legislation through the State House, and a lot of people are smoking weed in Illinois legally these days. Can you give us an update on the law, the effects of the law, challenges, things that are still not taken care of? Little riffing on the reefer report here.
So yeah, I mean, implementation has been bumpy, and that could be the greatest understatement of the century. But we're starting to see progress on that front. We in this past session passed an update to allow for more lotteries, to allow for more dispensary licenses, in an effort to undo the harm that came from the way that implementation rolled out. We said from the beginning, we're building the plane as we fly it. No state had ever accomplished what we've set out to do. And we haven't accomplished it yet either. But we're much further down the runway. If you look at even the craft licensing that happened, craft and infusers and transport, if you look at the demographics of that licensing, that happened without hiccup, right? There were none of the lottery issues that we had on the dispensary side, which has its own issues to sort out. But if you look at the demographic makeup of those licenses, I think that the theory was proven in that this social equity model works to bring diversity to the licensing space. Implementation still needs work. We still have to figure out how to handle those big volumes of licenses, how to deal with issues of ballot box stuffing, for example. And right now we are further dealing with hearing from folks who got licenses in the dispensary lottery who are being pushed out. The actual social equity component of the licensing group, those folks are in some cases getting pushed out or pressured to sell to non-social equity applicants. So again, we're going to constantly have to stay on top of this to make sure that we make the tweaks we need to make and bring us to a more diverse industry in Illinois.
Well, in that realm, just last week, the City Council opened up Loop to dispensaries, and the outcry is that again, the social equity folks are going to be pushed out. That those very lucrative, most possibly lucrative dispensary locations in the Loop will only go to the same old people, moneyed white guys and gals scooping them up, the spots downtown.
I don't even know that that's necessarily true, given that we now have people with licenses, right? Because we've gotten social equity applicants licenses, they could be in competition for those spaces. The reality, though, is this is a profoundly expensive industry to get into. It's going to be hard. It just is. Downtown real estate, more expensive. Downtown security, more expensive. And so those are real challenges, and there's not a lot of great answers to how do we get access to capital. One of the biggest things that needs to happen is the Safe Banking Act has to pass at the federal level. Access to credit is one of the biggest equity barriers we've got. If your only access to capital to build out your business is in the private equity markets, those white guys are always going to have a leg up there. That's
right.
very, very real. Getting that access to banking, getting that access to traditional financing. What we did in Illinois with the fund, the revolving loan fund, was it's the best you can do to make up for the lack of traditional lending available. But we need both. Absolutely need both.
Who put forward that Safe Banking Act? Is that a Bernie Sanders thing?
I don't even know. I'm not sure who the sponsor is now. It changes with some regularity. There's the MORE Act, which is everything. It's the full legalization. And I think both of them are on that. I can't remember who the latest sponsors of the Safe Banking Act, which is a component of the MORE Act. You know how the feds, it's like Legos.
Yeah. We're all underneath the results of the census, that pretty imperfect census that was taken during COVID and under a previous president who really didn't want to count everybody. So now we're dealing with the remaps as a result of it, everything from the federal to the city level. We just notified people that the last chance they have to voice some reaction to a model map that was put out by the committee here in Chicago is running out. Next week is the last. This week is the last time. How is that going statewide or on any of those levels? How do you see this process unraveling or raveling? I should say.
So I mean, there's still ongoing litigation around the state maps, as there always is. I did go through the last remap. It was, a little less complicated because of, the census issues that you mentioned. We've now passed 2 state maps, one using the community survey data, and then some corrections based on discrepancies in the data when we got the actual census data. And those maps are still being challenged in court. So there's not a lot to say because we don't know what's going to come of that. And then we also redrew the Supreme Court map. And I cannot overemphasize, it's impossible to overstate the importance of the Supreme Court elections coming up in the state Supreme Court. And people forget that we elect our Supreme Court justices, and they forget that the balance can very easily shift with these new districts. And we sort of take for granted that our Supreme Court is going to uphold the progressive laws that we pass. But we shouldn't take that for granted. So there's 2 races coming up. There's Lake County. They're both suburban, north and west. And those seats will make the difference in our Supreme Court in terms of, whether we continue to have that level of progressive support with our state Supreme Court. So, I don't want folks to sleep on that one. And then we still have to do the congressional map in the fall.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the congressional map, we know you're a state representative here in Illinois, but we know you also have your eyes on what goes on in DC and around the world. So can you share with us any of your understanding about steps being taken in Washington these days, such as the debt ceiling conversation, the reconciliation bill, passing Biden's reconstruction bill? Who knows? Fill us in on what you see going on in DC.
I certainly can't do chapter and verse on their work as much as I do on ours. But the debt ceiling argument is so ludicrous. Once again, the Republicans are turning it into something it isn't, and refusing to cooperate. So incredibly frustrating. They lead folks to believe that it is actually spending more rather than paying our bills. And so incredibly frustrating, hopeful that we do avoid a shutdown over that. And really anxiously watching for the infrastructure plan to come through, because that will once again help to kickstart projects in our communities. So I'm hopeful on that front, and loving the new definition of transportation, which, by the way, we already adopted here in Illinois. So we're using transportation funds to build bike paths and pedestrian spaces. So it's great that we're moving in that direction on the federal level as well.
Cool. When you come back to the neighborhood after being down in Springfield, what's maybe the first couple of things you do once you already catch up on your sleep and say hi to the kids and all, kiss the dogs, whatever.
All of that.
Yeah, I touch the lake. I come home and touch the lake. I reground myself. So that has been a ritual forever. It just brings me back to our happy place. We love our neighborhood, right? And so that's the big one. An our pub burger never hurts to make me feel back at home.
Right.
Some enchiladas from Quetzala. Those are definite things I miss when I'm away.
That's
What
nice.
is the food like in Springfield?
I
That wasn't a planned question, so
I cook a lot when I'm down there for a number of reasons. It actually started during the Rauner years when Rauner had trackers watching folks and Republicans would get in trouble for socializing with Democrats. So I started holding dinner parties in my apartment, and it's a tradition that I've continued. In fact, I once was voted. The Capital Facts blog has something called the Golden Horseshoe Awards, and I once got an honorable mention for best restaurant in Springfield in my apartment upstairs from the dive bar. So it comes and goes. It's actually been sort of sad being back in Springfield during the spring because so many restaurants didn't survive our absence for a year. Downtown Springfield really depends on the business of the capital. It's not a super hopping place otherwise. They don't have a lot of other life downtown beyond the government. And so when we're gone, it's a big strain on the restaurants, and a lot of them closed. A lot of my favorites closed. So it's I sort of bounce between 2 or 3 restaurants when I eat out, and otherwise I cook and have people over.
Well, Kelly Cassidy, it's always great talking to you. We look forward to bumping into you in the next few days in the neighborhood, and keep up the great work. We are really appreciative.
Speaking of bumping into me in the neighborhood, we've got our coffee stops back up and running, and we're going to be at Charmers on Saturday morning, probably while you're broadcasting.
All right.
So yeah, we'll be at Charmers, I think, starting at 10 o'clock. Yeah.
Right,
So
when this show ends,
Exactly.
go over and visit with Kelly at Charmers, right there on the corner of Jarvis and Greenview.
Yep.
Right
We'll be out on the patio. I'll buy you a cup of coffee, play Stump the DJ, ask me anything. It's always fun.
Sweet.
Okay, we want
Lovely,
to thank
Kelly.
everybody out there for listening to WLUW and live from the Heartland. Stay tuned for our next guest from the People's Law Office, Michael Deutsch. Going to fill a bunch of you younger people in on what went on in Attica 50 years ago. And for those of us who were around back then, it brings back some saddened memories. And now we want to bring on an old friend, someone we've known for over 50 years. And for that time, he's been doing great work for social and political justice. The one, the only Michael Deutsch of the People's Law Office. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning to you and Kathy.
All right. So 50 years ago in September, a lot of us, were really aware of what was going on at a place called Attica. And it was a time of heightened consciousness among prisoners and the rights of political prisoners, as well as just prisoners in general. And there was a big event that happened at Attica, a very tragic event, upstate New York. How about filling us in on what went on and how you played a role in it?
Okay. And between the 9th and the 13th of 1971, the prisoners at Attica rebelled about the conditions and the treatment they were experiencing. They had tried for months to get some changes without any response. And there was kind of an uprising, which was not planned, but the frustration was so strong that they broke the door to Times Square, which divides the prison into 4 different blocks. And that when that door opened, 1,200 prisoners streamed into D Yard, some of them taking hostages, and they were all there, and they immediately had to figure out how to deal with this situation. They selected leaders who were going to be negotiators. They submitted 28 demands. They asked for observers to come in from outside, Bobby Seale, many others, William Kunstler, and other people from the community. And they organized a little situation there where they protected the hostages, the Muslims protected the hostages, and they put out these demands, and they started to negotiate. And this went on for 4 days, negotiating, feeding all the people in the yard, protecting all the people in the yard. And in the end, the negotiations failed because they would not fire the mean racist warden named Kuzi. And the other thing is they wouldn't give the prisoners amnesty. And what had happened in the early seconds of the rebellion, a guard was trampled and died later on. And people were thinking they were all going to get charged with felony murder for being involved in a riot where somebody was killed. So they were supposed to come in. The assault force, which was made up of state police and prison guards, had been waiting 4 days around, getting all hyped up. There were all these false rumors of prisoners who had emasculated the hostages, they tortured the hostages, which were all false. But this whole racial anger was building. And then rather than go in on Sunday, which they had planned, they said, oh, we can't go in now. Everyone will be home watching football on TV and it'll be too bad. So they postponed it to Monday morning when it was raining out, and they swarmed into D-Yard. In 6 minutes, they shot 4,000 rounds. They killed 39 people. 10 of them were their own civilian and prison employees. And people were killed with their hands in the air. These were people who had no weapons, really, only makeshift. And they just fired. It was called a turkey shoot. And after that, they lined up all the prisoners who had not been killed. They stripped them nude. They took their glasses, their false teeth, their watches, and they beat them. And then they made them run through a gauntlet of club swinging prison guards, sending them to their cells 4 at a time. But the leaders X's were put on their back, and they were tortured, essentially. And one of my good buddies that I met through Attica, Big Black, Frank Smith, was put on a table with a football under his chin and told if he dropped the football, they would kill him. And then they put hot bullets and lit cigarettes all over his body and beat him up. And he sat on that table for 4 hours. So that was the Attica uprising, the Attica rebellion, and then the massacre and torture, systematic torture that went after that. And that very day, September 13th, the state police who had been involved in the massacre, their leaders were in the yard covering up evidence, not keeping track of the guns that were used, not gathering the bullets that were shot, not measuring, because they were already setting up a cover-up to cover up the crimes of the state police and the prison guards. So, and that was what their whole view was. We're not going to indict any prison guards, and the prison guards were not allowed to come in the yard. They came in with their own weapons. And that was against what they said were the orders of the higher ups. And as a result of that, they were focused on indicting the prisoners, and they had a grand jury that was set up. I came to Attica in the October of 1971, where I found prisoners with gunshots that had not been treated. They had an ambulance for every one of the hostages waiting at the prison gate on September 13th. They had nothing for the prisoners. And it wasn't until 5 hours later that the seriously wounded prisoners were taken out of the prison. And as a result of that delay, 10 prisoners bled to death, who would have been saved if they would have had the ambulance that would take the injured prisoners. There were hostages that weren't injured at all, and they were put in an ambulance. So the medical care was outrageous. They were still prisoners with broken bones and bullet wounds even 3 weeks later. And one of my partners, Jeff Haas, was one of the first lawyers that were allowed into the prison. They had gone to the prison on September 13th with a court order to get in, and the prison said, we won't let you in. And they called the judge, and the judge said, well, I can't do anything. And they didn't get in until 4 days later. They were the first lawyers that got in, and they were the first statement was smuggled out by the prisoners saying they're unified, they're going to resist and jail the real criminals, and Rockefeller, who ordered the assault. So from there, go ahead. Should I continue, or you want to ask me?
yeah.
Talk a little bit about Rockefeller, his role. He was kind of a liberal Republican when they had those kind of guys. And he
Right.
played a pretty terrible role in this.
Yeah, Rockefeller, they asked for Rockefeller to come to talk to the prisoners, or at least talk to the observers. And he said he wasn't going to do it. And he refused to negotiate, and he ordered the massacre. And he was supposedly a liberal Republican, but in the end, what he said, there was this taped conversation that Rockefeller had with Nixon after the rebellion, and he said it was the blacks. The blacks were responsible for this, the Angela Davis crowd. And this is what Rockefeller was telling Nixon. And Nixon was saying, oh, it's very successful. You did a great job, when all these people were killed and maimed and injured for life. So Rockefeller, and actually, interestingly, Rockefeller was designated as the vice president because Nixon resigned and Rockefeller was named as the vice president. And some of the Attica brothers testified at the hearings on him becoming vice president, saying what he did and why he did it. And it was all racially motivated, essentially. Although there were a lot of white prisoners that were involved, there were political white prisoners. The population of Attica was quite unique because it had older prisoners. There were members of the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords Party, the followers of Elijah Muhammad, and they were very politically sophisticated. They knew what they were doing, and they had these demands. One of the demands was for passage to an anti-imperialist country, which they knew that was not going to happen. But they wanted to show that they didn't trust the U.S. or the government.
That era, as Michael mentioned, it was an era that was dominated by the reaction of the powers that be to the people struggling to be free, whether it was Black Panthers, prisoners, as in George Jackson in San Quentin, and other prisoner events at the time. One of the reasons that we felt it was important to talk with you today was a lot of people never knew about this that are around today. The young folks that are activists, some of them don't know the story. Now, the People's Law Office had involvement, as you just mentioned, right at the start when Jeff entered. And there are books and films about the event. What would you suggest for folks to read or look up in order to know more about the details of this most horrific happening?
There's a film by a guy by the name of Mike Hull, who interviews Liz Fink, who was one of the lawyers that was very involved with us on Attica. And I think it's called something, if you Google Mike Hull, Hull, and Attica, you'll get a link to his film. And Liz was able to get a lot of documents that the authorities said were destroyed. And she found these documents and took them. And a lot of the film is a documentary about the massacre and the torture, and shows a lot of footage that has never been shown before. So that's an excellent one. I haven't seen this one. Stanley Nelson, who's done a documentary on the Panthers, he did one on Attica, which was on Showtime, which was also a good footage and a lot of good interviews of people. And yeah, those are the ones that stick in my mind. The other
Actually, people go to Wikipedia, they list a number of films and books.
Okay.
And it's a pretty good summation, not as good as the one you're doing, but it's worth looking at.
Okay. One of the things I wanted that triggered my mind, when George Jackson was killed, who was at San Quentin,
Right.
The prisoners at Attica were so affected by that they all went into the mess hall and didn't refuse to eat and were in silence. And that was leading up to Attica, because George Jackson was killed, I think, in August 28th, and then Attica followed in September 9th. So George Jackson had a lot of influence on what happened at Attica.
Mike, you do a lot of work around prisons and people who have been in prison or going to prison. I wondered if you could share your thoughts on post-Attica. Have there been any improvements? We still have terrible conditions? There's some new discussion starting to take place after the George Floyd thing, and people are just, there's a kind of a changing of the way people view race and race relations in this country. But what's the status of people in prison and the prison reform movement at this time?
Well, there's a movement for abolition of prisons, which has been taken up by Angela Davis and others. I had written something called The Road from Attica, because there was a lot of talk after Attica, we're going to reform the prisons, we're going to, make prisoners constitutional rights, protect them, we're going to have prison legal services. But the other thing that happened was that they decided they were going to isolate prison leaders and writ writers, people who write to Congress, and people who were politically sophisticated. And they created what was across the nation control unit prisons, where prisoners were classified, not that they did anything wrong in prison, just because of who they were and what their minds were. They were put in these long-term isolation units. We had one in Illinois, and California had a very notorious one, Pelican Bay. And the federal government set it all out through the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Marion, Illinois, down in Southern Illinois, had a control unit. They had all these political prisoners locked up. A lot of the BLA people, Rafael Cancel Miranda from the Puerto Rican independence movement. So there was a move. The reform was mild at best. And the real thing was repression of leaders and people who were going to speak and organize. And there's been some efforts to, some of those control units have been closed down, others have not. And I think there's more consciousness about the what goes on in prison, but I don't see real changes coming, not real substantive changes in any prison, and the prisons in Illinois are terrible. I mean, Pontiac prison is like a lockdown prison. They don't get medical care. People have been dying from COVID. They didn't let enough people out. It's just not much different than what it was under Attica.
Sheriff Dart just asked for the state to take back its prisoners
from the county jail.
I saw that. Yeah.
What do you think about that? What do you think of Dart and his attempts to reform at county? If you have
it's mixed. I mean, it's mixed. I know there's been a big lawsuit against the county jail about the conditions there. I think he's kind of a mild liberal around some of this stuff, and of course he's a politician, so he's trying to appear, reasonable. But I think it's all a question of overcrowding. If they send all the Cook County jail people who are doing time to prisons, the prisons are going to be overcrowded. I guess the jail is overcrowded as well, but I don't think that's a real solution. The real solution is to let people out of prison. Get all the people who are nonviolent out of prison right away. Make sure that people don't do these. I have a client now who's done 45 years in prison. He committed a crime when he was 18 years old, and he can't get parole because he's one of the last people that are eligible for parole. And there are people doing all these long prison sentences that don't need to be in prison, and they're not really doing anything substantive about that.
Yeah,
Michael, you mentioned letting people out of prison, and our own state's attorney Kim Fox, she's taken a lot of heat for people being let out, even if there's no connection to them doing anything wrong. Just right. The idea that she lets people out. Any take on that?
Yeah, well, I think Kim Fox did a really positive thing when she said that the state's attorney's office was not going to weigh in on whether someone should get parole or not. Because in the past, the state's attorney would write this terrible letter saying this person shouldn't get parole. He did this, she did that. And now she's backed off from that. She says, I'm not going to take a position one way or the other. So that's good. I think that was a good thing that she did. And there's a lot of pressure on her. And, we got some people, like the client I had, she actually wrote a letter saying they didn't oppose parole. And the parole board got so upset. Why is that? Why are you letting this person out? Why are you agreeing to give him parole? And that's why she backed off and said, I'm not going to get involved in deciding whether someone gets parole or not. But in the result, it was a good result because mostly the state's attorney has always said, don't give this person parole. Now, she's more progressive than our past state's attorneys, but she doesn't want to weigh in on that.
Michael Deutsch, I'm not sure if you and your comrades at People's Law Office hear it enough, but for your work at Attica, for your work on behalf of the survivors of the Hampton raid, for all of the work that you do that no one else does, we are so grateful. I just want to say that out loud right now while you're here, because you do things that no one else does. And I don't know where the rest of these people are, but I'm curious if you do, as in survivors of the Attica event, journalists who were touched by it, politicians that became part of the story, where are they now? Are any of them in any interesting places that you know of?
Well, one of the things we did for the 9th and the 13th, we had 2 Zoom forums. And one of the forums was a panel of all the surviving prisoners who were willing to come and talk. Now, a lot of the leaders have died, Big Black, Roger Champion, Herbert Blyden. Those were the people that really were the focus of the organizing. But we had a lot of people come and listen and want to be part of it. And then there was a panel that I was on about the legal stuff, and there was an observer on that panel, Reverend Scott from Rochester, and another brother. And then the second day, we had Prisons Today, and a lot of people who were around Prisons Today talked and spoke and were part of that. So I forgot the question.
Who's around? Anyone?
Yeah, Angela Davis is still speaking out. Actually, Danny Glover was a keynote speaker at the ATA event. Mumia gave a tape interview report that was very good. And some of those people who were involved in Attica, lawyers, we had lawyers come from all over, lawyers from Detroit, from Boston, from New York City, from Chicago. And some of those lawyers were involved with planning these events through the National Lawyers Guild and the National Conference of Black Lawyers. So some of these lawyers are still doing good work, and that's good. And some of the observers, like, William Kunstler died, but the president of the Lawyers Guild at that time, Louis Steele, he was involved in the planning. And yeah, there's some people that are doing good work. We wish there were more, and hopefully, these young people who we try to work with are going to take up the mantle as we, fade into the background.
That's the great note to end it on. Thank you, Michael Deutsch, for bringing us to the younger generation.
I just want to say one thing that I haven't said, which is kind of a victory. Ultimately, we brought a civil case on behalf of the victims of Attica, the families of people who were killed, tortured, etc. And it went on for 20 years. And finally, we settled the case for $12 million. So that was like a Pyrrhic victory. It was a victory that people got some money. And as Big Black said, I didn't go in the yard to get a barrel of money. I wanted people to know we were human beings and we wanted to be treated as such. So there was some little victory that we got out of that.
You're great,
you do
Michael.
great work.
Thank you so much for joining us on Live from the Heartland today. We'll call on you regularly as we have in the past.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Because of what you know that no one else does.
Okay, take care.
All right. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye. You are still listening to Live from the Heartland. Are going to be right back with our third guest, Donnie Biggins, welcoming Donnie Biggins to tell us about. Hi, Donnie.
Hey,
Welcome
thanks
to
for
Live
having
from the
me.
Heartland.
I'm honored to be here.
Donnie is the Fitzgerald's music dude. What's your real title? I'm sorry, that's not probably it.
My cheesy title is head of music at Fitzgerald's
Okay.
in
Well,
Berwyn,
that's a
Illinois.
big
That's a
title.
big deal. A lot of good music coming out of that club for a lot of years.
Yeah.
Bingo. So what are we inviting music lovers to this weekend, Donnie?
So this weekend we are hosting our inaugural Berwyn Blues Festival. Fitzgerald's has been a home for blues music for over 40 years. We have an ongoing great history with a lot of record labels, such as Alligator Records. And it's always just kind of been a home for our community and fan base here. They love blues music. And so, earlier in the year, we discussed we weren't going to be hosting our traditional American Music Fest that is in July.
Yeah.
So this was an alternative festival idea we came up with. And it has some similar vibes to the American Music Fest, since blues music traditionally is an American genre of music, and kind of the backbone of many different genres, as I'm sure you know. So it's just a great weekend to kind of celebrate a lot of our Chicago favorites, and also to invite tons of touring acts that are not your typical Chicago blues sound. So it's a more blues rock or a poppy blues. There's lots of variations in there. So you're not just coming out and seeing a similar style one after another. It varies a lot.
So given that this is a Saturday morning show at this point, you want to highlight anybody who's showing today, Saturday, or tomorrow, Sunday, or?
Yeah, of course.
Shout out a couple names.
Yeah, on today for Saturday, we have on our outdoor stage. So we have two stages, one outside and one inside. And of course, inside we're following our state mandates for mask wearing. And I should also mention that the festival itself is you need to show proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test to enter. But for Saturday's show, this afternoon, we have one of my favorite acts that we played right before this segment, Jackie Venson. And Jackie is very well known in Texas and throughout the South, but has yet to really, make a big footprint up here in the North. And we hosted her in August out on our patio, and it is one of the best live shows I have ever seen in my life. She is quite unique and can do everything. Just an amazing songwriter, amazing guitar player. And this afternoon set is really stacked. So we have Jackie Benson, followed by Betty Smith, who's from the West Coast and is more of like a soul R&B blues singer. Followed by Thornetta Davis, who is the queen of the blues out of Detroit. And then closing that night is another Austin act, Black Joe Lewis and the Honey Bears. So those are some real good highlights for Saturday. And then for tomorrow, we have more of our Chicago favorites with Dave Herrero and Ann Harris and Joanna Connor Band. And we also are welcoming a newer act. His name's Eddie Ninevolt, and he is from Atlanta, Georgia, and has this a very southern, like blues R&B, kind of like a late 60s, early 70s vibe. Very, very good, energetic band. They're also closing out the club on Saturday, so we're getting to see them twice.
Way cool.
But, our big headliner on Sunday is Chicago's own Ronnie Baker Brooks.
Nice.
Donnie, would you fill us in a little bit on the blues scene? Is it expanding these days? You know, I think of blues. I think a lot of times of old blues singers. I also do. There were always younger guys coming around like Luther Allison. And I just wondered, are there more younger guys than old guys these days? And is there a kind of resurgence of blues and in people's listening tastes?
Yeah, there's definitely a resurgence in a little bit of a different way. You know, there's some younger Chicago acts that have been around for a few years. If you pay attention to a lot of the blues, you know, Nick Moss. We have a new act from the west side of Chicago. His name's Omar Coleman. And
Michael Damani?
I'm not too familiar with Michael.
Okay.
but
Chicago Blues All-Stars.
One big highlight of note for our festival this weekend is the representation of female-led blues bands. These are, you know, female guitarists that more often than not you don't really see throughout the country on blues festivals, and I think that is a big change that we've seen over the years. Is just a lot more female representation in the blues scene, and we're highlighting a lot of those acts this weekend.
So Donnie, we acknowledge this segment on the show is a short one for you who knows so much that we'd like to ask more about, especially since it's the first time I've seen you since you were a student and I was a teacher.
Yeah.
Oh wow!
But in our last couple of minutes, tell us about this other joint that you're involved with, the Golden Dagger.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Golden Dagger is a rebranded music venue that I own in Lincoln Park. It's at 2447 North Halsted, right down the street from legendary blues club Kingston Mines. But Golden Dagger reopened in April and is a coffee bar with live music 7 nights a week. So we started hosting music again. We reopened in April. It was previously a Tonic Room, and we rebranded and reopened after being closed for 14 months. Built a new stage. The vibe of the room is very New Orleans. You know, the stage is up front in the window. It's a kind of a small, tight stage. Bands play right there in the window, so you walk by and hear all the music going on. And it's just a real beautiful space that I've always kind of wanted to change and upgrade in certain ways, and was finally able to kind of execute that plan while I was shut down.
So is it, you say coffee bar like? Does that mean it's like you're serving? Maybe you got beignets with it, or is there any booze?
You know, I really wanted to have beignets. I couldn't figure out a way to partner with a restaurant that could. I don't have a kitchen, so it's just a tavern, and I couldn't find a kitchen that could make them fresh. You know, beignets you need kind of right out of the oil.
Yeah.
But we do serve croissants and coffee at 8 a.m. every day, and the live music, like I said, is 6 nights a week. So you know, you can come stop by every single morning.
Okay, well, that's for the Golden Dagger. We want to remind people the reason we're talking to Donnie is the Fitzgerald's Nightclub's Berwyn Blues Fest that is going on as we speak, and for a couple more days, full of good talent. Thanks so much for making time for us today, Donnie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll have more time another time, I think.
All right, that sounds great. It's so good to see you.
Good to meet you,
Likewise.
brother.
Likewise.
Nice to meet you too.
Oh, gosh, that was great. Okay, so events you want to be aware of right now today, Chicago's Race Against Gun Violence, something you can get information on at stridesforpeace.nmotive.com. A lot of ways to support grassroots groups all over our city who are working on this very serious problem. That's today. Chicago's Race Against Gun Violence. Look it up. October 2nd, there will be a march in support of women's reproductive rights. Give you more information on that next week. Michael,
And a little sports report, some good news. The Chicago Sky are in the playoffs in the women's basketball world. And the White Sox have clinched their division. And hopefully they'll win enough games so that they get home field advantage, whoever they play, which I think is probably going to be Houston. Okay.
so we're going to go out as we often do with Twin Peaks singing Our World, a super mellow song. You have listened to this show for over 25 years, whether you knew it or not. We've brought you live from the Heartland all that time. We broadcast every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Central on Chicago's WLUW 88.7 FM. It also is streamed live from WLUW.org and archived on our channel at youtube.com/Heartland Media. We also often wind up on CAN TV on channel 27. We want to thank our entire team, Luis Mejia Aarons in Veracruz, Lynn Orman Weiss, and now we are also found on Spotify podcasts as well as Google Podcasts. We ask you to do good in the world.
Because the world needs all the good that we do, that you do, that we do. All power to the people.